This is part 2 of the amazing biblical historical prophecies found in the book of Daniel, chapters 2 and 6.
Had Daniel been just a clever politician trying to make his way to the top in Babylon, he would have stopped the interpretation of the dream right there. But Daniel had a message that would be relevant to the end of Earth's history. Courageously he said, "And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee." The king's smile of satisfaction must have quickly faded when he heard those words from Daniel. Babylon's proud monarch apparently gave no thought to the idea that any other nation would ever rule the world. In fact, clay tablets excavated by archaeologists are inscribed with these words, "For the astonishment of men I have built this house. These portals for the astonishment of multitudes of people with beauty I adorned. May it last forever." However, God had said another power would arise. Another kingdom would supersede the golden kingdom of Babylon. Interestingly enough, Daniel lived to see it happen, the silver kingdom replacing the gold one. For on October 13th, 539 B.C., the golden kingdom of Babylon came to an inglorious end. During the reign of Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's proud and arrogant grandson, Cyrus the Mede laid siege to Babylon. Feeling recklessly secure in his capital and foolishly ignoring this aggression, King Belshazzar arranged a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles. To show his defiance to the God of heaven, he commanded that the golden vessels taken by his grandfather from the temple in Jerusalem be brought to his table. And the king and his princes, his wives and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. In the midst of this revelry, a bloodless hand emerged from the sleeve of darkness. Slowly the mystic fingers began to etch in fiery letters across the plastered wall words which no one could understand. Terrified, the festivities ceased. Silence gripped the great banquet hall. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his knees knocked together and his legs gave way. Like his grandfather, Belshazzar summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. But no one could read those fateful words. Finally, the Queen Mother appeared in the banquet hall and reminded Belshazzar of Daniel, who decades before had revealed the meaning of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The prophet was summoned. Still trembling with fear, the king asked Daniel to explain the writing on the wall. In response to the king's request, Daniel interpreted the warning. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Peres is the singular form of Upharsin. And even as Daniel's solemn words reverberated into silence around the carved columns of the banquet hall, a messenger came with news that the city had been taken. The Medes and Persians had diverted the Euphrates River, which ran through the city, out of its channel. They had marched down the riverbed into the city through the massive brass gates that had been carelessly left unlocked. The city was filled with soldiers of the enemy. The triumphant shouts of the army of Cyrus could be heard above the terrified cries of the revelers. Through the prophet Isaiah, God had described the strategy by which the city was to be taken, even naming the general who would accomplish it 150 years before he was born. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. Daniel had prophesied that after the golden empire of Babylon, an inferior kingdom represented by the chest and arms of silver would come to power. The coalition government of the Medes and Persians ruled the Middle East for 2 centuries. However, the limitations of that kingdom were also predicted by Daniel. Notice the next part of this moving prophecy. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. The brilliant young general Alexander the Great defeated Darius III of Persia in the Battle of Arbela, 331 BC. At the youthful age of 25, young Alexander became ruler over the most extensive empire the world had known. The Greek historian Arrian, writing about Alexander, commented, "I am persuaded there was no nation, city, nor people where his name did not reach. There seems to me to have been some divine hand presiding both over his birth and actions." Fittingly, much of the armor worn by Greek infantry was made of brass. The historian Herodotus described Greek pirates as men of bronze coming from the sea. 300 years before this third empire came on the scene of action, God had predicted in Daniel 10 that Medo-Persia would be followed by the kingdom of Grecia. Amazing, isn't it? Spellbound, King Nebuchadnezzar listened in awe as Daniel continued the interpretation, coming down to the legs of iron in the great metal man. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks everything and smashes everything. On June 22nd, 168 BC, at the Battle of Pydna, perished the empire of Alexander the Great, 144 years after his death. The Republic of Rome grasped the scepter of world control, crushing all opposition and subjecting whole nations into slavery. Both secular and sacred historians recognize the imagery of this famous prophecy. Edward Gibbon observed, "The images of gold or silver or brass that might serve to represent the nations and their kings were successively broken by the iron monarchy of Rome." Hippolytus, the 3rd century BC theologian, wrote, "Rejoice, blessed Daniel. Thou hast not been in error. All these things have come to pass. Already the iron rules. Already it subdues and breaks in pieces.